started? And
Ready when you are.
We are recording. Okay, great. Welcome everyone to the Good Systems Postdoc Interest Group. My name is Andrea Christel, and I'm the Good Systems Network Relationship Manager and Interim Program Director. And this afternoon, it's my pleasure to welcome Tara Zimmerman, who will be presenting today. Tara is a 2020 postdoctoral research fellow who's funded through the National Science Foundation and working at the UT Austin High School with Ken Fleischman. She completed her PhD in 2020 at the University of North Texas and is continuing to develop the social noise framework in the contexts of misinformation and COVID-19, as well as working on projects through Good Systems. Tara, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Andrea. Let me share my screen. Okay, well, welcome everyone. I'm so glad to be here and be able to share some of my work with you. I'll go ahead and just give you a little bit of a preview of what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to give you some background on how I was inspired to do this work and how I then used the results that I gained from my initial study to revise the social noise framework. And then before we close, I'm going to just give you a few minutes of information about a current project that I'm working on that I hope to get maybe some of your feedback on. So if you have any questions along the way, make sure to jot those down. And I'll go ahead and get started. I was initially inspired to do this work in 2017 during the first year of my PhD work. And at this time, the misinformation crisis was really coming into the national and even international conversations. And at the same time, I was being steeped in the core theories and frameworks that we use in information science. So, for example, Claude Shannon's mathematical theory of communication, in 1948, he identified entropy in this model of how information passes from the sender to the receiver, specifically noting the possible interference of physical or semantic noise. Also, the work of Bandura, which was interesting to me because in 2001, Bandura pointed out that when people encounter information online, they combine personal values with the perceived values of the social network to determine how to behave toward that information. So combining those two ideas in the context of social media, personal and environmental concerns introduce entropy or disorder into communication on social media, potentially disturbing, distorting, obscuring the intended message. So I identified this phenomenon as social noise. And I designed a framework to attempt to explain this. I began with the information being received on the left and observable information on the right, and then this larger area in between. Then I labeled that with the personal and environmental factors that Bandura had mentioned, showing that they are an influence between the information being received and the observable information behavior. Then I added 4 constructs that I proposed were part of social noise. So first, identity curation. This is a user's effort to craft their online image or persona. Relationship management, a user's desire to build community with an individual or a group they perceive to be of high social value. Cultural commitments. This refers to a person's strongly held beliefs, their understandings of their roles and responsibilities in society, as well as their perceived ability to affect those. And then conflict management. This is a user's attitude toward social tension online, as well as their effort to negotiate that. So As for my methodological approach, Ditchfield and Meredith state that qualitative methodology provides the best insight into a user's motivations. And this was the approach I wanted to take with this work because I knew that understanding users' influences and the thinking behind their observable behavior was key to understanding social noise. So I drew inspiration for this work from contextual inquiry, which was originally designed as a user experience research method, and it involves a three-step process. So first, after obtaining the participants' consent to observe their screen, interview them, and record them, I intentionally shifted the focus away from myself and explained that they were the experts on their own Facebook behavior and that I was there to learn from them. Second, the participants shared their screen with me and they allowed me to observe them as they scrolled through and followed my previous instructions to find 3 informational posts and then respond to those as they normally would. I did not use a think aloud protocol here, but just simply observed as they found the 3 posts they chose and responded to those. And then the third step was that I interviewed the participant about the behavior that I had just observed. So there we go. I reviewed and coded this data using thematic analysis, a proven approach for organizing and describing a data set that is rich in detail such as this. Braun and Clark do a really good job of breaking down thematic analysis into 6 clear steps that illustrate how this process works, and that is what I used. I won't go into detail here about that, but I'm happy to discuss it further with anyone who is interested later. So the influence of the 4 constructs of social noise were clearly present in this data, and I would like to share just some of those results with you. So first of all, identity curation. These are instances where the users are aware that their information behavior may reflect on their personal image. So for example, one participant said, all my high school friends who know me well, there's a whole group of them that are fascinated with the things I post about aviation. That's another reason I don't just junk post. Another participant said, my screen is in such a way here where it's blocking my quotes. Hang on one second, let me move this. I work for the government and people have friended me on Facebook who I'm pretty sure are very different from me. They're going to see stuff that I've liked and is not going to cause problems for me, but it doesn't necessarily prevent me from doing it. I just think about it. And a third person put it very bluntly when he said, they'll think, well, he liked this post or article, so he's racist. You know, people assume things about people by what you share on Facebook. So with the construct of identity curation, we see individuals considering how others perceive them in relationship to what they are posting on social media. Next is relationship management. So these are instances where users recognize that their information behavior can influence their relationships with others. For example, one participant said, I shared that event with this friend because she used to work at the library and it looks like something she'd be interested in. She invites me to a bunch of stuff in the library. She's also in my book club. So here the participant is using her information behavior to reach out to someone with shared interests. In the next example, the participant says, I just kind of read it, so I liked it. Very rarely do I read something and not like it, just so the person knows that I read it. So here the person is using their information behavior to send a message to the original poster that they read the post. Another participant pointed out how concerns about relationships inhibited their information behavior. She said, a lot of Facebook, just can't find a good place for my screen. Here we go. I have a lot of Facebook friends and contacts who are sort of all across the board in terms of politics. And as much as I'm not trying to hide what I'm interested in reading about, I just don't have the energy to engage in extreme political conversations on Facebook. so I'll very rarely actually post. So you can see that with relationship management, we see individuals making decisions about their information behavior that are influenced by their relationships with others. So next we'll look at cultural commitments, and that is those are instances where users' information behavior is influenced by the issues and beliefs that are particularly important to them. So for example, I post about what matters to me and my household. We spread awareness of my child's diagnosis. Here, a mother is talking about using Facebook as a platform to both share and gather information pertaining to her son's rare medical diagnosis. Another participant explains why she shares information about animals in need of adoption. If somebody likes it and posts it, they're just getting information out there. The more they can share with their friends to get information out, we can clear out those animal shelters. And another participant said, I have one passion that I will get all up in everybody's face about on Facebook, and that's the environmental stuff. So within the construct of cultural commitments, we see individuals prioritizing particular issues that are important to them and demonstrating that through their information behavior. And finally, conflict management. This is seen in instances where users attempt to navigate social conflict through their information behavior. So here's some examples. One person said, years ago, I started a gun debate and it got crazy on Facebook. It was kind of funny. My coworkers jumped in the post and my family members jumped in the post. And I basically asked questions to both sides. And I felt like a moderator almost, trying to get everybody's true thoughts on it. Another participant who was a nurse explained why he actively engaged in conflict by correcting medical misinformation he sees posted on social media. He said, that's how they feel, their opinion or what one person told them, but I've actually got a background in it. Another person said, you won't see me posting about much political stuff on Facebook because even though I don't really care what other people think, I also don't want them all up in my business on my wall. I just don't want to deal with it. So we can see from these examples that people have different attitudes toward conflict on social media, and they can use their information behavior to help manage potential conflict. So with the 4 proposed constructs of social noise, they were all present in the data as I've shown, but they did not occur independently. And their interrelatedness became increasingly interesting to me. So you may have noticed how some of the example quotes that I used showed the influence of more than one of the social noise constructs at a time. So for example, the quote that I used as an example of conflict management, the nurse saying he was willing to engage in conflict when he corrected medical misinformation. But that's clearly an example of a cultural commitment as well. So because of his career, he is invested in people having correct medical information, healthcare information. So there are multiple factors motivating his behavior. And this makes sense, right? Because humans are complicated and we're often motivated by more than one thing at any given time. So in light of all of this, I revised the social noise framework that I had previously shown to look and work a little differently. So here you can see that social media is received on the left by the social media user, then it's filtered through all of this social noise before resulting in observable information behavior. As you can see, identity curation is the dominant construct within the social noise. It's shown at the top of the box, and it is serving as a mediating influence for the other 3 constructs. This is because on social media, users are primarily concerned with how they present themselves and how others perceive them. Underneath this concern for self-presentation, the other 3 constructs are mutually shaping. So relationship management influences conflict management, which influences cultural commitments, and so forth. So when considering a particular piece of information received from social media, the user is influenced by all four of these constructs to varying degrees as they decide how to behave toward information. My paper laying out all of this research and the social noise framework is currently under review with the journal Information, Communication, and Society. And I am continuing to explore the implications of the social noise framework. I have a new study about social noise on Twitter that was recently approved by the IRB that I'm going to begin work on soon. But for now, what I would like to share with you very quickly is about a related project that I'm working on. And this is research that is derived from data collected within this same study that we've just been discussing, but it was beyond the scope of that study. So while I was asking the Facebook users about their interaction with information and with Facebook, many of them spontaneously mentioned the role that Facebook itself played in their social media information behavior. In fact, 18 of the 20 participants unprompted made reference to Facebook, and many of them talked about it multiple times. And they expressed varying levels of concern and varying levels of understanding about how Facebook actually works. So this really sparked my interest. The participants were acknowledging the unique context of Facebook and how the platform facilitates and constrains and generally impacts their information behavior. For example, some people talked about when they were talking about replying to a friend's post or liking a photo, they spoke about Facebook almost as if it were a third person involved in the interaction. And I found this acknowledgement of Facebook in this manner fascinating. So I am currently in the process of analyzing the full corpus of data and writing up those findings. At this early stage in the process, though, what I can say is that some of the most common references made to Facebook were comments about its algorithms. Because lots of people know that Facebook uses algorithms to manage how information is shared and what individual users see, but almost everyone expressed uncertainty and confusion about how it worked. And in fact, those who didn't express uncertainty were just flat wrong. They thought they were certain about how it worked, but it was clearly they didn't have all the information. So this is a qualitative study that questions how Facebook itself impacts users' perceptions of technology, information, and their own agency in the communication process. Many people said that Facebook was their primary social media platform and mentioned relying on it in a number of unique ways in their daily lives. So, for example, watching video playlists while getting ready in the mornings, calendaring events, planning outings with friends, just to name a few. However, at the same time, these participants expressed a lot of skepticism toward Facebook regarding privacy issues. For example, people would say, if you and I are friends and I comment on your post, will your friends see my comment even though I'm not friends with them? And there were a wide variety of opinions about scenarios like this and other related scenarios. So what we know at this point is that Facebook users actively recognize the power of this platform, but they're also unsure exactly about how it works. They're driven to use the platform for a variety of reasons in their own personal context, but they're also somewhat leery of what it might be doing behind the scenes that they're not aware of. So overall, this study is really focusing on an individual's efforts to balance the affordances of Facebook against their own privacy concerns. And I am working with Ken Fleischman to develop this idea more robustly. And we would welcome any comments or suggestions that you might have regarding this study. So this really concludes the main portion of my presentation. I've got my references here, and then I just wanted to thank all of you again for being here and just offer some time for some Q&A. If anyone has any questions, I'd be open to those. see, I'm going to change my view so I can see all of you. James, looks like you have a question.
Oh, no, I was doing the clap emoji. I don't have a question
Oh,
yet.
that was clap. I saw the hand.
I just wanted to give you a round of applause because it was a great talk.
Thank you. I apologize. I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
I have a question. My
Yeah.
internet is acting very poorly, so I'm not turning my camera on. Sorry about that.
No, thank you.
So I want to ask a little bit more about in the social noise framework, noise is always related to like a signal. And I was wondering if you could elaborate a little more on the signal that's being distorted by the noise in these spaces, especially like the behavior of liking something you're characterizing as a form of social orientation that you think is fitting into the social noise framework. So in the case of liking or those kind of more subtle behaviors, like what is the signal that this social stuff is the noise for?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Steve. And that's a really good one that you asked about the liking. So for example, that's an example of how we have the ability through Facebook to show appreciation for something, but also we're constrained. Remember, it's been maybe a couple of years ago, it used to only be like, and then they expanded. Now there are like 6 different emojis that you can show. So now you can express a reaction to something, but not always, you can't react in all the ways. You still had 1, now we have 6. You can make a comment. So we saw the example previously, one of the quotes that I read, where someone said they were using the like as a way to show they had read something. So someone made a post, I'm showing my friend I read it by clicking like. Do I like it in the traditional sense of the word? Do I agree? That is completely unclear. So between the person sending and saying, I want to inform people about X by sharing this article, and the person responding, there's a lot of room for noise. And it's not always clear from the view of the sender or the receiver if that communication is actually being received in the way it was intended. There was a lot of questions that were asked about what do you think someone meant when they sent this? So people would say like, well, I know her, she has a really, for example, she has a very liberal agenda. So I know everything that she posts is going to be in support of blah, blah, blah. So basically the identity that a person is imbued with through another person's perception colors all the information that they share. So she may have been, the person being spoken of may have shared something completely different, but because it was taken through this filter of, oh, she has a liberal agenda, then that's how that information was perceived. So maybe that would affect whether the person would even read the whole thing or whether they would just dismiss it outright. So in that sense, the signal that the sender is sending may not be communicating to the receiver exactly what that sender intended. That was a really long roundabout answer to your question, Steve. Did that help at all?
Yeah, I think it did. I get the, you're kind of tying the idea of the actual signal being the intent of the communication and the noise being how it's received, which is a good way of thinking about it. The other way I was thinking it might be is related to like the design intent, like what Facebook or Twitter would expect people to understand when a like is sent out. But I think
Right.
the person-to-person perspective is really useful in your framework. Thank you. Great talk today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Candy, did you have a question?
Yeah, so I wanted to build on Steve's question and your answer. So it seems like what happened there was that the platform was expanded to allow for a
Mhm.
wider range of interactions. So I was wondering about how people experience the agency of the platform itself in that sense, and where the agency really gets pinned down.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and that's a lot of what has been prompting me to follow up on this research, and might even um, lead to further research beyond even the comments that we have here, because um, think about it. None of us had any training in Facebook use, right? No one said, oh, when you use the thumbs up, that means you get, but don't use the thumbs up if it just means you read it, because then that's not clear. Like, this has all just been picked up. And so what one person believes Facebook meant by developing this and giving us these options might be very different than what someone else took away from it and the way that they're using it. Yet when you talk to people, it seems like everyone thinks the way they see it must be the way other people see it. And they say, oh, well, I think she only shares this because blah, blah, blah. And there's a lot of assumptions being made about other people and about why they do what they do. And there are a lot of assumptions being made about what other people perceive about me. But then the Facebook piece of that you're asking about, it's just uncertainty, just so much uncertainty. So that was, like I said, what spurred so much interest here. So I haven't encountered it if people, just regular users, have a strong belief about why Facebook set it up this way, or what it means that Facebook set it up this way. It's just that they're acknowledging, yeah, Facebook lets us do this, and I don't really know why. And they'll say, several people actually said things like, I mean, Facebook thinks I'm just a cat person because I just post dog and cat photos all the time. They literally would say, Facebook thinks. Another person said, I don't know why this is showing up on my feed. Facebook must think it's important. So the question that you're asking there is definitely the one that needs the most investigation. So I don't know the answer to it, but I'm definitely interested.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's an interesting case of technology appropriation by users in terms of
Mhm.
using the functionalities that were originally built into Facebook by the designers for their own purposes and to their own ends. And
Yes.
I mean, not that Facebook always listens to users, but certainly they've made some faux pas on their privacy settings, for example, and they have made changes in response to user feedback. So I
Yes.
think you'd want to see the, current instance of Facebook is a result of years of interactions between designers and users. So that makes me
Yes.
think of Aisha Gersoy's dissertation work on League of Legends and the ways that that League of Legends is also negotiated between the designers and users of the platform. So in that sense, not sure this is canonical, at least our use of boundary objects, but to me it makes me think of these platforms serving as boundary objects between the different stakeholders, certainly the designers and the users, and also the shareholders of the companies, also the advertisers, and the list goes on. Thanks.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously I wasn't in the room when the decision was made, but I think an example of that, what you're talking about, is the like, people thought it literally meant like. And so then people complained, because people said this to me. They said, I don't want to hit like because there was a really sad story that was shared. And I don't want them to think that I'm happy about that. And I'm almost certain that must have been how the tear face emoji, the angry face emoji, all those things evolved because people expressed those kinds of frustrations. It's a good point. I say you have a question.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep my camera off because my internet's also being weird today, but
Great.
just kind of jumping in to what Ken was saying. I also think the like boundary objects framework is really, really interesting to think about. I tend to come at things from a perspective of like record keeping and archiving and preservation a little bit more, but like there is that sense of like how, I guess kind of going back to your theoretical framework, like these personal factors, these environmental factors, the actions that we're taking in these systems and the effects that those actions have on us in the system and the system, like all of this is very much connected and nuanced. And the documentation or like the documents that are produced are boundary objects in some ways. Like the Facebook post is potentially a boundary object because it is like you post it for a reason and your
Right.
friends read it for a reason. And maybe like the one quote you had about the nurse who like argues with people, like that's a very different orientation. And it very much in line with the boundary objects thing. It's like collaboration without consensus, right? Like there's no consensus there about the validity of medical data, but there is some interaction that is able to use these documents together. So like everyone is kind of brought to the table around these, I mean, I'm calling them documents, but just like Facebook posts or like the kind of documentary artifacts that are produced.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to kind of see the less documentary approach because I'm very embedded in like in reading the artifacts and the documents and stuff, and that's a very like different style. But it's really interesting to kind of see this. I guess I don't super have a question, but like just more about how you see that interplay going on and like these moments of tension that aren't necessarily like coherent or consensus based, but more like how do you collaborate without that?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So consider the difference between the example that you used there of the nurse versus the person on that same slide. There was a person who said he started a gun debate intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
And then people weighed in on it and he was the moderator. Well, he had no expertise. There's definitely no consensus on that. And yet he was proactively going out looking to stir up controversy and to stir up ideas and wanting to have a conversation versus the nurse who was being more defensive, I guess maybe you could say, was reacting something that someone else had posted versus the gun debate guy was being very proactive. I'm just, I'm sitting around here bored. I'm going to post this and see what happens. So, the intention of the person and what they're trying to get across, and then how it comes across on the platform, even that, there's some noise, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Thank you. Any other questions, thoughts?
Hi, Tara. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Marlon.
Very nice talk. Thank you. One thing that I keep wondering, because you have your interview sample. Sorry, I missed the beginning a little bit, but you have your interview sample, and therefore you kind of analyze their production content or communication intent. I wonder if there is a way to set up a study that could be really interesting to actually try to distill down into the communication intent versus the communication reception and the variety within that reception to kind of, I don't know, not enumerate the noise, but to weed out some of the nuances within the noise framework, not just on the topic level, but kind of the communication, how the signal is getting affected. Any
Yeah,
any thoughts on there?
I think that's a great idea. I don't know off the top of my head, how one would approach that, but that's specifically why in this, I'm not sure if you saw the part at the beginning, but the methodology involved me observing people do respond to 3 posts and then asking them about it, because I wanted to go beyond just asking people about their behavior, because I suspected there might be an issue of how I think I behave normally, and then maybe how I actually behave. And there may be some bit of a gap, like a lack of awareness. And so the difference between what people are doing and what you can see and what they really meant by it, that gap is really interesting. So what I'm hearing you say is, so say I'm the Facebook, I'm the sender of information. If you knew what I intended to send, and then my receiver, how they received it, and we could look at the same piece of information from both sides, that would be really interesting.
Right. Yeah, so I was thinking in my head, like, is there a way to study that in an existing group to have the ecological validity quite high, but then how do you get that consent? And then the other
Yeah.
way is actually when you mentioned the lab study, right, that you ask people to read content, then I wonder if there's a setup that you could try when people post first, and then you recycle the same post into the reception end for another set of participants. So you can analyze the same post, so production and the reading of or reception of it.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we could talk more about that offline. I think that's a really great idea.
Yeah, happy to, because my dissertation work is looking at social presence and all that stuff. So I'm theoretically also informed in there.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Oh yeah, you're welcome. Very exciting.
Let's see how much time we have. We probably have time for one more question, if anyone has one. If not, that's okay. I know everybody's busy.
I can have a quick one.
Oh, okay.
You mentioned the algorithmic side of things, people mentioning, but you didn't. Do you have any kind of preliminary insights into what some of the nuances in terms of people understanding Facebook and how that might affect the noise behavior or the information behavior that you're looking into? Or is that too preliminary at this point?
I would say it's probably too preliminary to say anything with much meat behind it.
Yeah.
But what I would say is that some of the things that people would say was questions about generic content that they're receiving. So things like videos on the watch list and suggested things, and also the paid posts. There were a lot of comments about why they were receiving certain types of advertising. So that was one. And then the other one off the top of my head that resonated with me a lot was the who sees what. And if you and I are friends, do you see not only everything that I post, but do you see everything that I comment on that is to people that you don't know? Do you see all that? Do you just see some of it? Is there a reason behind it? Those were the types of questions that people were asking. And they almost everybody, it seemed like, had an opinion on it, but they were all across the board. And, you know, no one seemed too sure exactly, but they had a good guess.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. I think that's a very interesting and kind of cloudy area, transparency on Facebook in terms of the information behavior and how that is perceived, and making that more aware for the communicators, and how that would actually affect their projected identity that they, and therefore information behavior as a result, would be interesting. Probably interesting study for Facebook, as well.
Yeah. And actually I saw a presentation by a UT student who recently received her PhD, Kathy Hill, and she's using the term algorithmic uncertainty. And she was studying the gig economy and the people that were using things, working for places like DoorDash and Instacart and Uber, and how they were in a similar, but not exactly the same similar situation. They were saying there's this algorithm and it's working in certain ways, and they were acknowledging that, but they didn't quite know what that meant for them. And I saw a big parallel. I'm hoping to follow up with her because I love that term, algorithmic uncertainty. Like there's this thing out there and it's affecting my life, but I really don't know how. Yeah, that has a lot of implications.
Awesome. Great.
Yeah. Okay, well, if no one else has a question, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you everyone so much for your time, and please be on the lookout for the next presentation in our Good System postdoc interest group. And thank you to everyone. Andrea, did you want to say anything before we close out for today?
Yeah, thank you so much, Tara, for a great presentation and for putting this series together.
Thank you so much. Okay, thanks everyone. Have a great day.